All right. Okay. Here we go. Well, I mean, nice meeting you. Yeah, I believe you've been using us for the past, half a year. In the infra space, there's different options. Sometimes there's not too many options. I guess before we go into that, I'm just curious, maybe you can introduce about Steer Protocol. I have a pretty good understanding of it, but maybe just introduce the, Steer Protocol.
Sure. Yeah. We're one of the leading automated liquidity managers in the industry today. We support about 45 chains, 60 exchanges in regards to their liquidity infrastructure. And we also work with about 300 or so, 350 different teams who've issued different markets through our protocol. So if people are doing a TGE or if they're running different types of liquidity programs, they'll more than often use us to automate the liquidity on the chain itself. We have about 35 different strategies that we use, and we span across the entire stack. We work again with chains, AMMs. We work with actually the token holders themselves of different projects. So it's all in between.
Conversation you said you've been in the industry for 10 years. Was Steer the first, crypto product you built, or was it kind of a slow evolution?
No, yeah, sure. Started out during the ICO boom in wallets. So we built one of the first not Steer, but another company called Ethos, built one of the first multi-chain wallets. There was no alchemy, and the graph was brand new. So we did a lot of the indexing ourselves. And so it's been interesting to see the industry kind of evolve to using, the graph and now, all the other different substreams and all the other different, tools out there. But yeah, so started out in wallets, was then acquired into a company called Voyager. Voyager Digital became one of the larger broker dealers in the U.S. Sadly, due to Three Arrows Capital and bad business decisions on the Voyager side, they fell apart. Luckily for me, I left prior to that. I ended up becoming CTO at a big data company where we built an L2. This was around the NFT craze in terms of timing. That was fun, but they ended up pivoting out of blockchain. And once you do that, I had to leave. So started doing volatility indexes for ETH and BTC. So trying to the VIX, but for crypto. And you can actually look at that on Bloomberg Terminal, TradingView, under BVIV and EVIV. Very, very proud of that work. And then Uniswap V3 had just been released. Now we're on to V4 and hooks and all these other fun things. But the white paper for V3 came out. I read it and realized that there was a hole in the industry that would need to be filled. And I'm very, very fortunate to be one of the leading providers now doing just that.
With Steer Protocol.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I'm just curious because, there's been a lot of changing, shifting in the market. It isn't just price, but also kind of almost a fundamental shift, right? In a way we can see the old web degen crypto is going through this transformation. Somehow this institutional enterprise is a completely different track almost. I'm just curious, how are you guys navigating that within your protocol? And just kind of maybe more forward looking.
Yeah, I mean, institutions obviously are kind of the biggest buyers right now. Retail's kind of washed out for a bit, which is understandable. We're in a unique place because if there's an on-chain market, us or one of our competitors are kind of required infrastructure if you really want to have a healthy market. So for us, it's partnerships with Coinbase and others where they have something called verifiedpools.com. We went out and built support for that. So any of the KYC markets or anything like permission markets we're able to support. We built ourselves on something called the Steer Network, and we have something called Steer Compute, and you can build different strategies. We have these on-chain, we have IDEs that you can run on the web. And a lot of those are now being used to build out, vault infrastructure, carry BTC trades, stability vaults, things for curators to use to launch different assets. And so that's kind of where we see a lot of the demand. It's weird, even though it's a bear market. Sadly, we're still extremely busy just because even if they're not doing TGEs, there are teams who are issuing stocks on chain or gold or some other stable coin. And
yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, it's so I guess you're seeing a real shift into maybe some of the more blue. I guess most of the assets of the vault are the blue chip assets or RWA or tokenized assets.
right now, I mean, those are the markets coming online.
Okay.
There's there's still teams doing TGEs. There's teams who are maybe migrating from one chain to another. But the real demand right now is kind of around stable coins, RWA liquidity. If someone has a looping strategy, you have to have liquidation liquidity so that if it needs to unwind, that's usually found on an AMM. And therefore you need an automated way to make sure the liquidity is in the right place at the right price. And so a lot of what's happening, even on, the vault infrastructure side with RWAs, we end up actually benefiting from just because of those requirements on chain.
Wow, I mean, that's, I'm very glad to hear that because, because right now, right, a lot of people are asking, where is the market going next? I mean, we seem to ask that question every 4 or 5 years, and it's good to see real healthy protocols or, projects out there. Yeah, and then maybe tell me a little bit more about your infrastructure setup, right? Because in a way, I think the industry itself is still figuring that out, because I know you guys are managing quite a lot of assets as well as complex on-chain smart contracts. I guess maybe tell me a little bit about the backend stack, as well as indexing in that perspective.
Yeah. We run a lot of indexers. I think I don't know how many we have with you guys, but I think it's over 10 or 15. Most of the time, really depends on the chain, but each chain has its own kind of situation. So the stack is very interesting. So we have what's called like a Steer Runtime Environment. And what that means is that you can write any type of code using any programming language that you decide. But you have to stick to certain rules. And those are just that you need to export 4 functions, which we can then read and consume. What's nice about that is you can package those strategies or basically that application logic up. And then what we do is we throw it onto IPFS. IPFS then becomes like the global registry for those documents. And so if, let's say I write a LP strategy for Uniswap V3, I can publish it onto the Steer smart contracts. That has a reference over to IPFS. You would get, for instance, an NFT saying, hey, Victor created this strategy. He should get 33% of the revenue generated because he's the one who wrote the code, right? And then anyone who could use your strategy, they could go onto our interface, launch these markets, and then they could say, okay, well, what algorithm would you like to use? And they could choose Victor's algorithm. And that would actually run within the browser. One of the really nice things about our platform is it's completely WASM based. So everything runs in the browser. You could run it in a TV. You could run it on a phone. All the strategies are basically these isolated compute modules. So we'll run it directly in the browser, give you a nice little live display. And then what's really nice is that if you publish out or you want to start these strategies, all of our nodes will index those. Using, your guys' services and others to basically understand what strategies need to be run and then basically automate them based on the second configuration during the publishing flow. So I guess that, yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. I was going to ask, so I guess subgraph or indexing is mostly for information flow, because we've seen people use it differently, right? The very basic one just slap into front end. Yeah. So for you guys.
Yeah, it's 2. So we use it for the front end, of course, but we also use it as like candle feeds or data feeds basically into these models that would run on top of our compute network, which then come back on chain with some certain values. We also need it when we connect to certain exchanges as well. Those are kind of like the backbone to a lot of those connections.
Yeah. And I guess the question is because you mentioned you did your own indexing quite a bit before. Because now we see there are essentially two different camps. One is, okay, you're starting out, right? It doesn't really matter. The other is more like bigger DeFi protocols are doing a hybrid approach, right? The graph is battle tested, but there are some quirks,
Other
right? So
indexers?
yeah, or people just rewrite their own RPC, in how
Mm,
try to parse their
mm.
own events. I'm just curious, like architecturally, uh, like what have you chosen and why one way or
Sure.
the other? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I personally really like the graph. There's alternatives out there. I don't know if I should be just like dropping names, but some of them, for instance, they don't have the historical context at the block level. And for
Mm-hmm.
us, that's very important. So we find ourselves always sitting in the GraphQL camp. I think anyone who's going to write their own indexing server
Crazy.
is down the wrong path. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You
Yeah.
you don't want to do that. I mean, it's not fun, and then you start realizing the nuances of it, and yeah, it just gets kind of crazy. There's a JavaScript indexing provider right now that's a little bit popular, but it kind of falls into that camp of there's certain nuance that you need that the graph has, whereas they don't. And then yeah, so I used to run. I think it was it was all JavaScript or Node. That's when we did our indexing, and yeah, I'm glad I'm off of that world. I would never hand do it again, or wish it upon anyone else. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense. We've been, yeah. Yeah. Anyway, internally we also have like OXATL, which is our own internal indexing. It's like a different, like a account based data, but that's kind of in-house. It's really a lot of work to make sure the data accuracy side of things
It's
that are
interesting.
correct. And what are the challenges that you have so far, say, working with the graph standard, like subgraphs, or
Mm.
yeah, just what are some of the
Yeah, I think for
challenges?
me,
Yeah.
we work with AMM markets, which are kind of I think one of the more unique just animals to deal with on chain. And for us, it's hard to do USD pricing. And
Mhm.
not all asset prices can be coalesced perfectly on chain. They don't have like a third leg or whatever it might be. So for us, I think not being able to do network calls in subgraphs are I think the biggest hurdle, which is I think why people reach out for some of the other solutions. But yeah, I think that's my biggest qualm. At the same time, it makes it deterministic. So I mean, it's one of the things that makes the graph subgraphs.
Yeah. What about the development process, right? Because it's kind of common that sometimes people have a very large subgraph, takes like weeks
No,
to think.
weeks. Yeah,
Yeah.
weeks. Yeah.
And then, but that's just the way how it's architected, right, underneath for, to be deterministic.
You could
Yeah.
snapshot it. I mean, if you have the
Yeah.
right DevOps in place, right, there's a way
Mhm.
to get back. There's a recent story on a chain that won't be named with an AMM, which I won't also name. Their entire subgraph went down, and there were no backups. And it was a pretty large provider that they were using to the point where it's like, are you sure about this? But it took them about 2.5, 3 weeks to reindex. And I think that really just puts a finger on the problem, right? Of like, this something needs to change or we need better backups, either or.
It makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it's always, it's like the RPC world, right? I do think indexing or subgraph, if you're running real assets on it, you should have a backup provider because the graph, by the way, it's like, open source and you can, it's compatible with a different provider.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there are issues, and I think that's why a lot of people end up using alternative providers outside of the graph.
Mhm.
We have the graph in all of our apps, but yeah, it's becoming more of a backup than a primary source.
Tell me more about that, regarding the primary versus the backup source. Uh, like what you
Sure,
use
sure.
primarily for your, yeah.
Yeah, it's more like if data's stale or if one of them goes down. A lot of the teams, a lot of the projects that we have sometimes will only be on the graph. And what will happen is
So are you talking about the graph, the decentralized
The
network?
graph,
Okay,
yeah, the
okay, got it.
decentralized
Okay.
network. They'll
I thought
deploy,
you meant
sorry, not
the
unhosted.
protocol. Yeah, yeah,
Sorry, sorry,
RPC as a
sorry. Yeah.
primary. Okay, sure, okay, gotcha,
Sorry.
yeah,
No. So they'll deploy.
yeah.
Sorry, I had to get my thoughts together. They'll deploy basically onto the decentralized network, but then they won't bribe enough, or there's some issue with the indexers or something like that. So what
Mhm.
happens is a lot of what we're doing is very, very important to make sure that the request goes through, making sure that the rebalance happens on chain. I mean, it's a lot of, like you said, it's a lot of money and it's a lot of risk. So that's very important to us. And a lot of times what we found with the decentralized network is actually the request will fail. Or it'll become a bad indexer. And at that point, you have to reach out to their teams, and then there has to be a conversation between the node operators. And at that point, you're way past when you were, the rebalance was supposed to happen, or there's some other kind of problem. So over time, we've just kind of understood that there needs to be some style of redundancy in place, and yeah, that's kind of where it sits. Usually the graph is a secondary source versus a primary source. And I think that's why you see, us running so many instances with you guys.
Yeah, so I guess the question is, what are some of the values and criteria when you look for like a subgraph provider, like us, like Ormi? What are some of the things that you?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think it's a sync time and reliability. Right. I mean, the biggest thing for us, that, and I think some charge based on network volume, which also can be cumbersome. So it kind of sits within those. One, I guess, would be price, and then two would be reliability. Right now, I don't think we've ever had a time where we've really had issues with your guys' platform.
Okay.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of
24/7.
yeah. But that, I think, is kind of why you see us kind of increasing our demand towards you guys, just because it's working well. Yeah.
Sure. No, that's good to hear. Yeah, because I see reliability because it depends on the use case, right? Because we have perps like big perps who are literally we cannot have less than 1 second delay for some of the dedicated environment. And then also like basically two things were more important criteria to look at it. One is latency or like uptime. The other is data integrity. I'm glad to hear that the uptime has satisfied your needs. I'm just curious about the data integrity side. Like you kind of in your workflow, is that something that's important, or how important it is? Because it happens that subgraph sometimes, whether due to bad RPC or anything else, that there can be data gap. Yeah, I don't know if you have been
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't think we've actually encountered that issue through you guys. Yeah. That's a really good question.
Yeah.
Uniswap V3 pools are usually have like the most events. I guess perps maybe as well,
Sure.
but it's just the most data, and so I can see that totally going wrong. But no, I have not. I've not come across data integrity issues. Yeah, but that's a good thing. Good thing.
Yeah, yeah, because sometimes people do point distribution and they calculate people's holdings. Like if you have some transaction missing, it's like on user, like where's my money? Yeah, so for a few like the bigger protocols we're doing, like it's on request, like hey, what are your contract address? We'll run a separate integrity checker on those. So but by the way, those are if you need ever need those things, like we'll be more than happy to work together on that. But it has to be like a case by case, a smart contract based, because otherwise we'll have to duplicate the entire RPC effort or resource. Yeah, well, I mean that's good to hear. Yeah, no, that's glad to hear. Are there any other? Oh, by the way, one last thing I'm curious is because we're trying to see what this agentic kind of workflow will be when it comes to data indexing, because we imagine like agents will get so good at one point where using agents to write a direct RPC indexer will be much easier than just relying on subgraph. Of course, that is just theory, and it's
crazy.
Looking. So yeah,
I would think that they would. Yeah. I would think they would go and use the subgraphs versus rebuilding.
Yeah, depends. Sometimes you might. I mean, like whether direct RPC call and implement your own task will be cheaper on RPC.
Sure. Sure.
consumption side
Wow.
versus,
That's crazy. I
yeah.
hadn't
But
even
there's
gone
some
down that
questions
road
we're
before.
thinking, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, there's the existential
Yeah.
threat. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Actually hadn't thought of that. I assumed that they would most likely go and use the infrastructure and then go run their own, so I guess they would just run their own nodes or like run their own subgraphs or go provision out. One versus running and just, querying logs. But yeah, that's interesting. That's very
Yeah, well, it's
interesting.
just something we're very much exploring inside because the future we really think is like right now as humans that creating data, consuming data, soon that will be abstracted away. Yeah, and also I guess when it comes to product feedback or interface, if there's an agentic workflow or some kind of automation workflow that can simplify things, what would it be like from your side? Like, what would you like to see? Just on the
Oh,
subgraph
in
management
my
side. Yeah.
from the subgraph management side, I'll give you one. You know how in Codex how you can do scheduled tasks? Scheduled tasks would be amazing across the data sets, right? So you could basically just say, look at Uniswap V3 subgraph, and then I have write to the agent, or I create a scheduled task like tell me the top 5 highest yielding pools based on volume, and it just
So
would just
the Steer will be passing that request instead of a human to that agentic layer for the scheduling task and underlying it managing the subgraph and getting data. And just essentially you talk to an interface and I just have to see what you need. But of course
yeah,
that's
yeah,
exactly
but
it.
that is like table stakes. I was just saying to have it as a reoccurring task might be helpful. All
Gotcha.
right.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. No, this is good. Good things. Are there any feedback? I don't know if there's anything you would like to whether on the product or.
It's a good question. I would say you guys are very responsive whenever we need something. So I can't say that there's any improvements you can do there. No, I don't have any feedback other than keep it up.